In a small village named Udala, there lived a gentle and beautiful young girl named Ujuka. She was known far and wide for her kindness and lovely smile, but life had not been easy for her. You see, Ujuka could not see. When she was just a little girl, she had an accident that took away her eyesight, leaving her in darkness ever since. But Ujuka was strong. Even though she couldn't see the world around her, she felt it deeply in her heart. She learned to listen closely and move carefully through the village, always with a smile and a kind word for everyone she met. Sadly, not everyone in the village was kind to Ujuka. There was a man named Longinus, a man feared by all. He was big and strong, but cruel and mean-hearted. Longinus wanted Ujuka for himself and would not leave her alone. He followed her around, threatening and scaring her every day. "Ujuka," he would growl harshly, "one day you will belong to me." Each time she heard his voice, Ujuka's heart would tremble with fear, and tears would quietly slip down her cheeks. But Ujuka was not alone. She had a younger brother, Ugona, who loved her very much. Ugona was brave, loyal, and would never let anyone hurt his sister. "Do not worry, my sister," Ugona always comforted her. "As long as I live, no harm will come to you." Everywhere Ujuka went, Ugona was right beside her, guiding her steps and shielding her from harm. And although life was filled with fear because of Longinus, Ujuka knew she had Ugona by her side. Little did they know, however, that their troubles were only just beginning. One bright morning, a stranger arrived in Udala. His name was Eric, a young and compassionate engineer from the city who had come to oversee construction projects in the village. Eric was kind-hearted, always smiling and greeting everyone warmly. The villagers quickly grew fond of him. One afternoon, Eric was walking near the market when he heard someone shouting. He turned quickly and saw Longinus roughly grabbing Ujuka's arm, trying to drag her away. Without thinking twice, Eric rushed over and shouted, "Leave her alone!" Longinus glared at Eric, angry and surprised that anyone would dare challenge him. But Eric stood firm, his voice steady and calm. "Let her go now," he said again. Seeing the determined look in Eric's eyes, Longinus finally released Ujuka and stormed away, cursing under his breath. Eric gently took Ujuka's trembling hand, comforting her softly. "You are safe now," he whispered. In that moment, something special happened between them. Ujuka felt warmth and kindness in Eric's touch and voice, unlike anything she'd known before. Eric, too, was moved by Ujuka's courage and gentle spirit. From that day on, their hearts began to quietly grow closer, little by little. Now, Ugona had his own troubles too. He had fallen deeply in love with a kind and beautiful girl from the village named Amara. Amara had a heart just as gentle as Ujuka's, and when she smiled, it felt like sunshine after the rain. But there was a problem. Amara's mother did not approve of Ugona. She believed Ugona was too poor, with nothing to offer her daughter. She wanted Amara to marry someone wealthy, someone who could give her a comfortable life. "Mother," Amara often pleaded, tears filling her eyes. "Ugona is a good man. His heart is richer than all the gold in the world." But her mother would only shake her head stubbornly. "Love cannot feed or clothe you, Amara," she insisted. "You must forget Ugona." Still, Ugona never lost hope. Every evening, after making sure Ujuka was safely asleep, he would secretly meet Amara by the riverbank. There, beneath the moonlit sky, they would promise each other that someday their dreams would come true. "Be patient, my love," Ugona would say softly, holding Amara's hand tightly. "One day your mother will understand." "I will wait for you forever," Amara whispered, leaning her head gently against his shoulder. Yet, deep in their hearts, they both knew their love was in danger, for trouble was quietly brewing in the shadows, waiting to tear them apart. After Eric bravely stood up to Longinus, Ujuka felt safer for a while. But Longinus was not the kind of man to give up easily. His obsession with Ujuka only grew stronger and darker. Each day, Longinus watched Ujuka closely, waiting for a chance when she was alone. But he soon realized something. Ujuka was never truly alone. Wherever she went, either Ugona, her loyal brother, or Eric, the kind engineer from the city, was always by her side. Even Amadi, the quiet man who owned a small bar in the village, kept a watchful eye on her. Amadi was gentle and thoughtful, silently caring deeply for Ujuka from afar. Though he never spoke of his feelings, he would quietly follow her movements, making sure Longinus never succeeded in his plans. One evening, when Ujuka was returning from the market, Longinus hid behind tall bushes near the village path, ready to take her away. But before he could reach her, Ugona appeared, calling out loudly, "Ujuka, I'm here! Wait for me!" Longinus cursed and retreated angrily, knowing his chance was lost again. Another day. He tried again near the river. But this time, Eric was close by, chatting with some villagers. When Eric saw Longinus approaching Ujuka, he quickly stepped forward, calmly shielding her from danger. "Stay away from her, Longinus," Eric warned firmly. "She is not yours to trouble." Frustrated, Longinus left again, his anger boiling inside him. Even Amadi, quiet as he was, protected Ujuka in his own gentle way. Whenever he saw Longinus lurking near her, Amadi would quietly signal the villagers to gather, forcing Longinus away without violence or fuss. No matter how many times Longinus tried, he always failed. But with each failure, his heart grew darker, his obsession deeper, and his anger more dangerous. Little did anyone know that his next move would change their lives forever. Longinus's heart was full of hatred, and his repeated failures made him desperate and dangerous. Determined to remove the one person who always protected Ujuka, Longinus decided on a wicked plan. One dark evening, when no one was watching, Longinus sneaked into Ugona's small room and carefully hid a stolen gun beneath his bed. Early the next morning, Longinus gathered the villagers, pretending to be worried and shocked. "My people!" Longinus cried out loudly, drawing a crowd around him. "Our village is no longer safe. I've heard Ugona is keeping a dangerous weapon, a gun. He plans to use it against us." The villagers were alarmed and confused. They could not imagine Ugona, who was always so kind and brave, doing something so terrible. But Longinus spoke with certainty, and fear began to spread quickly among the crowd. "Search his house if you don't believe me," Longinus challenged, a wicked smile hidden behind his eyes. Reluctantly, the villagers followed him to Ugona's home. When they found the gun hidden beneath Ugona's bed, everyone gasped in shock and disbelief. "It's not mine," Ugona pleaded, panic filling his voice. "I don't know how that got there. You must believe me." But the villagers, blinded by fear and influenced by Longinus's lies, refused to listen. Anger quickly replaced reason. They dragged Ugona outside, accusing him harshly, their voices rising louder and louder. Ujuka, hearing the commotion, stumbled from her room, begging the villagers to stop. "Please, he is innocent. My brother would never harm anyone." But her cries went unheard. Amara, who had just arrived, rushed forward, pleading desperately, "Stop! Ugona is innocent. He has done nothing wrong." But the angry crowd, fueled by Longinus's false words, refused to listen. Within moments, the situation spun out of control, and Ugona was cruelly beaten by those he once called friends. By the time they realized their terrible mistake, it was too late. Ugona lay lifeless on the ground, his brave and loving heart silenced forever. Ujuka fell to her knees, crying out in deep agony. Her protector, her beloved brother, was gone. Amara collapsed beside her, weeping bitterly, her heart shattered into pieces. That night, darkness fell heavily over Udala village, not only in the sky but also in the hearts of everyone who loved Ugona. And although Longinus thought he had finally won, the story was far from over. Far away from Udala, back in the bustling city, Eric had a girlfriend named Tina. Tina was bright, cheerful, and full of life. They had been together for a long time, but recently Tina noticed Eric was changing. Something felt different, and she couldn't understand why. Eric was no longer himself. Whenever Tina talked to him, he seemed distant, his mind wandering far away. He would sit quietly, staring at nothing, barely paying attention to their conversations. "Eric,"
Tina asked him softly one evening, holding his hand gently. "Is everything okay? You seem different these days." Eric gave her a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm fine, Tina," he answered, trying to sound convincing. "Just busy with work." But Tina knew him too well. She felt something wasn't right. Eric's heart was somewhere else, and it worried her deeply. She wondered what had happened during his time in the village. Trying to reconnect with him, Tina prepared special dinners, planned romantic evenings, and tried everything she could think of to bring back the Eric she knew and loved.
But nothing seemed to work. Eric remained quiet, lost in thoughts she couldn't reach. One night, Tina finally asked directly, sadness in her voice, "Eric, is there someone else?" Eric looked away, unable to meet her eyes. He didn't say a word, but his silence spoke clearly enough. Tina's heart sank as tears filled her eyes. She now understood that Eric had left part of his heart behind in the village. Her fears were true, and their relationship would never be the same again. Back in Udala, Ujuka remained on Eric's mind. He could not forget her gentle nature, her courage, and the quiet moments they shared. Eric knew his life was changing, but he didn't yet understand just how much more would soon happen. After Ugona's tragic death, Ujuka's life became unbearable. She was lonely, afraid, and deeply sad. Eric saw her suffering and knew he couldn't leave her alone in Udala any longer. He decided it was time for a change. "Ujuka," Eric gently told her one evening, holding her hand softly, "let me take you away from here. You deserve a life free from fear and sadness. There is a surgery in the city that can help you regain your sight." Ujuka's heart trembled with hope, mixed with fear. "Do you truly think it's possible?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I believe it is," Eric reassured her warmly, "and I promise to stay by your side through it all." Ujuka agreed, trusting Eric completely. Soon they traveled together to the big city, leaving behind the painful memories and dangers of Udala village. In the city, doctors carefully examined Ujuka's eyes and assured them that the surgery could be successful. Eric stood by her, never leaving her side, comforting her through every step. Finally, the day of the surgery arrived. Eric held Ujuka's hand tightly. "I'll be right here waiting," he whispered softly, as the doctors gently took her into the operating room. Hours later, the surgery was complete. When the bandages were slowly removed from Ujuka's eyes, she blinked several times, feeling anxious. Slowly, shapes and colors appeared before her eyes. At first blurred, then clearer. For the first time since childhood, Ujuka could truly see. "I can see," she whispered in awe, tears streaming down her face. "I can really see." Doctors and nurses cheered happily, but no one was happier than Eric. After Ujuka regained her sight, Eric received news that the project in Udala needed urgent attention. Although he didn't want to leave Ujuka's side, Eric knew he had to return to the village, just for a short while. But unknown to Eric, Longinus had been waiting patiently. His heart had grown darker with jealousy and rage, especially after learning that Ujuka had left the village with Eric. Longinus blamed Eric for stealing away the one person he wanted most, and he swore revenge. The moment Eric stepped foot back in Udala, Longinus saw his chance. Late that night, as Eric walked alone back to his lodgings, Longinus and his men suddenly surrounded him. Before Eric could even call for help, they captured him, taking him deep into the forest. Days passed, then weeks, and Eric remained missing. Back in the city, Ujuka grew restless and afraid. She tried calling Eric many times, but there was never any answer. With each passing day, her anxiety deepened. "Where are you, Eric?" she whispered sadly, tears filling her eyes. She feared something terrible had happened, and she couldn't bear the thought of losing yet another person she cared deeply for. Back in Udala, villagers whispered quietly about Eric's disappearance, afraid to speak openly because of Longinus's threats. No one knew exactly where Eric was, but everyone suspected Longinus. Little did they know that help was already on the way, and soon everything they thought they understood would change forever.
After weeks passed without hearing anything from Eric, Ujuka's heart grew heavy with worry. She had regained her eyesight and could finally see the beauty of the world around her. But none of that mattered without Eric. She searched everywhere, calling Eric's friends, his workplace, and even people back in Udala village. But everyone gave her the same answer. They hadn't seen or heard from Eric in weeks. "Where could he be?" Ujuka whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. She could not sleep or eat, haunted by thoughts of Eric alone and possibly hurt somewhere. Each day that passed without news increased her anxiety and frustration. Ujuka couldn't understand why Eric would disappear without a trace. It wasn't like him at all. One afternoon, desperate for answers, she decided to travel back to Udala. She hoped someone there might know something about Eric's whereabouts. Yet the villagers were afraid to talk openly because of Longinus. Ujuka sensed their fear, making her realize something terrible had happened. Feeling defeated, she returned to the city, exhausted and heartbroken. Days became weeks, and still no news came. But just when Ujuka began losing hope, something unexpected happened. Something that would finally unravel the mystery of Eric's disappearance. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, the police received a secret tip about Longinus's hideout deep in the forest. Acting swiftly, they stormed the place one rainy morning and found Eric, tired, injured, and chained in an old wooden hut. He had been missing for weeks, held by Longinus like a prisoner. Eric was weak, his clothes torn, but he was alive. When the news reached Ujuka, she rushed to the hospital where Eric had been taken. Her heart beat wildly in her chest as she entered the room. There he was, thin, pale, but alive. Eric slowly turned his head toward her, and their eyes met for the first time. For a moment there was silence. Then Ujuka gasped, her eyes wide with shock. "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus, it can't be!" she cried, stepping back, her hand covering her mouth. Everyone in the room turned toward her in confusion. Eric, weak and barely able to sit up, looked at her with tired eyes. "Ujuka," he said softly. "What's wrong?" Tears welled up in her eyes as memories came flooding back. Memories of a playground, a rock thrown in childish carelessness, a little girl screaming in pain, and the darkness that followed. She now recognized his face clearly. With trembling lips she spoke, her voice broken. You were the boy. The one who blinded me. It was you, Eric. You caused my blindness." Eric's face went pale. His heart dropped. He searched his memory and slowly, painfully, it came back to him. The accident from long ago. The moment he had spent years trying to forget. He tried to speak, but Ujuka shook her head, eyes filled with pain. "You ruined my life," she whispered. "I trusted you. I cared for you. But it was you all along." Without waiting for a reply, Ujuka turned and walked out of the room, her heart breaking all over again. The man she had come to love was the same one who had unknowingly taken her sight. Eric remained on the hospital bed, too stunned to move, too shattered to breathe. The past had caught up with both of them, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ujuka didn't stop walking until she reached the hospital gate. Her legs felt weak, but her heart hurt even more. The man she had come to trust, the one who had saved her, cared for her, and promised her a better life, was the same boy who had caused her blindness all those years ago. The pain was too much to carry. For days, Ujuka didn't answer Eric's calls. She avoided his messages and refused to speak to anyone who mentioned his name. She stayed alone in her small room in the city, crying quietly each night. "I can't believe it," she whispered again and again. Why did it have to be him? Eric, still recovering from his ordeal, sent her letters and voice messages, trying to explain, trying to say how sorry he was. He told her he had no idea she was the same little girl from his past. He begged for her forgiveness, but Ujuka couldn't bring herself to listen. How could she forgive someone who had taken her sight? How could she love the same person who caused her years of pain? "I will never forgive him," she finally said to herself, wiping her tears. "He changed my life forever,
and no amount of sorry can undo that. And just like that, she made a decision. She shut the door to her heart and walked away from Eric, leaving behind the man she once thought would be her future. Her heart was in pieces, and her spirit was tired.
All she wanted now was peace, far from the past, far from pain, and far from Eric. Days turned into weeks, and Ujuka tried to move on with her life. She stayed quiet, avoided crowds, and kept to herself. But one rainy afternoon, everything changed. She was walking down the street, lost in thought, when she accidentally bumped into a tall young man holding an umbrella. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said quickly, stepping back. No, it's all right," the man replied with a warm smile. "I should have watched where I was going." His voice was kind, his presence gentle, very different from the chaos that had filled her life recently. "My name's John," he said, holding out his hand. "Ujuka," she replied softly, shaking it. They stood under the rain for a few more moments, talking about nothing and everything. Something about John made Ujuka feel calm, like a quiet breeze after a storm. Over the next few days they ran into each other again, at the cafe, by the park, and once at the pharmacy. Slowly their conversations grew longer, their laughter a little louder, and their hearts a little lighter. John never pressured her to talk about her past. He simply listened, shared his own stories, and made her smile again. For the first time in a long while, Ujuka felt like she could breathe. As the weeks passed, their bond deepened. They began to spend more time together, taking long walks, sharing meals, and enjoying quiet moments. A new friendship slowly began to blossom into something more. What Ujuka didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that John was Eric's younger brother. Fate, it seemed, was not finished with their story yet. While Ujuka was slowly picking up the pieces of her heart, Eric was falling apart. Every day without her felt like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest. He couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, and no matter how many times he tried to explain or say he was sorry, Ujuka's silence cut deeper than any words ever could. He replayed the moment in the hospital over and over in his mind. Her face full of shock, her voice trembling with pain, her words that pierced through him like a knife. "You ruined my life." Eric felt completely broken. He stayed indoors most days, avoiding calls and ignoring messages. His apartment was quiet and cold, much like his heart. He looked through old pictures of him and Ujuka, moments they once shared, smiles they once exchanged, and his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he whispered one night, holding a picture frame close to his chest. "But maybe she's better off without me." That night, lost in despair and convinced there was nothing left to live for, Eric took a handful of pills from his medicine cabinet. He swallowed them slowly, tears streaming down his face, and lay down quietly on his bed, waiting for the pain to end. The world around him grew dim, his breathing slowed, and soon everything went dark. Eric had given up, believing he had lost the only person who ever made him feel truly alive. But fate still had one more chapter to write, and help was closer than he ever imagined. John had been smiling all morning. For the first time in a long while, he felt genuinely happy. Ujuka had brought peace and joy into his life, and he couldn't wait to share the news with his older brother Eric. "I want you to meet someone special," John had said excitedly over the phone a few days earlier. But Eric never answered. Still, John decided to visit him in person and surprise him. He carried a small bag of food and a wide smile as he climbed the stairs to Eric's apartment. But the moment he opened the door, his smile faded. The room was dark and quiet, too quiet. "Eric?" he called out, stepping inside. There was no answer, just the sound of the ticking wall clock and the soft humming of the refrigerator. Then John saw it. Eric lying still on the couch, his skin pale, his lips dry, and an empty pill bottle on the floor beside him. "Eric!" John shouted, panic rushing through his chest. He dropped the food and rushed to his brother, shaking him gently. "Wake up! Eric, please!" There was no response.
With trembling hands, John called for an ambulance and stayed by Eric's side, praying over and over, "Please don't leave me. Please, God, don't let him die." Tears rolled down his face as paramedics rushed in and carried Eric out on a stretcher. John followed closely, his heart pounding, his thoughts racing. As they sped to the hospital, one question haunted him deeply. What had pushed his brother to the edge? He didn't know it yet, but the answer was tied to the same girl he had fallen in love with, Ujuka. And everything was about to come crashing down. At the hospital, the hours felt like days. John sat by Eric's bedside, eyes fixed on the machines that beeped softly with each of his brother's shallow breaths. Nurses moved in and out quietly, checking drips, adjusting wires, whispering updates. The doctors said Eric had overdosed, but was lucky to be found in time. John held his brother's hand tightly. "Please wake up," he whispered. "I can't lose you." Then slowly, Eric's fingers moved. "Eric." John leaned forward, hope flooding his voice. Eric's eyes fluttered open, weak and confused at first. He blinked slowly, as if waking from a terrible dream. "John," he croaked. "I'm here," John said, wiping his eyes. "You're going to be okay." For a while, neither of them spoke. Eric was too weak, and John was too emotional. But then Eric whispered a name. "Ujuka." John froze. "Wait, what did you say?" Eric looked at him, tears forming in his tired eyes. "Ujuka. She's the only one I ever loved. I hurt her, and I couldn't live with it." John's heart dropped. His hands slowly let go of Eric's. The pieces started to come together. The gentle girl he had been dating. The pain in her eyes when she spoke of betrayal. Her name. "Ujuka," John whispered to himself. "No, it can't be." Without saying a word, John rushed out of the hospital and called Ujuka. "You need to come," he said quietly. "It's Eric. He tried to end his life. Because of you." Ujuka arrived at the hospital within the hour, breathless, her heart pounding. She stepped into the room and saw Eric lying there, pale and weak, but alive. "Why?" she asked in a choked voice. "Why would you do this?" Eric looked up at her, his eyes filled with pain and honesty. "Because I thought I had lost you forever. I thought I didn't deserve to live after what I did." Ujuka stood frozen, tears falling freely down her cheeks. She had spent so long running from the past, so long holding on to the pain. But now, seeing Eric like this, broken, fragile, yet still full of love, her heart began to soften. "I was angry," she whispered, "so angry. But I never wanted this. I never wanted to lose you." Eric tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I'm sorry. For everything." Ujuka moved closer and held his hand gently. "I forgive you," she said through her tears. "And I'm sorry too, for walking away." In that quiet hospital room, the past finally lost its grip. Two broken hearts came back together, held not by perfect words, but by the raw truth of love, pain, and forgiveness. Eric and Ujuka embraced gently, their tears mixing, their hearts finally at peace. The storm was over. John stood quietly outside the hospital room, watching through the glass as Eric and Ujuka held each other, their heads resting close, tears rolling down their cheeks. He had brought Ujuka here, hoping to help his brother heal. But now he knew the full truth. And it hurt. Ujuka wasn't just any girl. She was the girl, the one Eric had talked about endlessly before his trip to Udala, the one he had risked everything to protect, the one he had almost died for. John swallowed hard. A part of him wanted to walk away, to forget he ever met Ujuka. But another part, the stronger part, knew what he had to do. Later that evening, when Ujuka came out of the room to meet him, there was silence between them for a moment. Her eyes were red from crying. His were filled with quiet understanding. "I'm sorry, John," she said softly. "I didn't know." John gave a small smile, trying to hide the heaviness in his chest. Neither did I. Life has a strange way of tying knots we never saw coming. He paused, then looked at her gently. You belong with him, Ujuka. You always did. I see that now. Ujuka's eyes welled up again. You've been so kind to me. John shook his head lightly. You don't need to explain. I'm just glad he's alive, and that you're here for him. He stepped forward and gave her a brief, warm hug. No bitterness, no regret. Just quiet strength. Later he entered the hospital room, walked up to Eric's bedside, and placed a hand on his shoulder. She's yours, he said simply. Take care of her. Eric looked at him, tears gathering in his eyes. Thank you, John. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, John replied. Just be happy. And with that, John stepped back, leaving the room and the love he never expected to find, with quiet dignity. He had lost someone special, yes, but in doing so he had given two broken hearts a second chance. And sometimes, that's the truest kind of love there is. Back in the quiet village of Udala, life was slowly returning to normal. The people whispered less about Longinus and more about peace. But there was one man who remained quiet through it all, Amadi, the soft-spoken bar owner who had always watched over Ujuka from a distance. Amadi had cared for Ujuka for a long time. He never said much, but his actions spoke loudly. He was always nearby when she walked alone, always offering help when she needed anything. After Ugonna died, Amadi stepped in quietly, not to take Ugonna's place, but to make sure Ujuka was safe and never left unprotected. He watched her grow stronger. He saw her smile again when Eric arrived, and even though his heart ached in silence, he never stood in the way. When the news reached him that Ujuka had reunited with Eric in the city, Amadi closed his eyes and took a long breath. He had always known his feelings might never be returned, but still, he had hoped. One evening he stood behind his small bar, wiping down the counter as the sun dipped low in the sky. An old friend sat across from him and said, "So, you heard? She's with the engineer." Amadi gave a small smile. "Yes, I heard. Are you all right?" Amadi looked up, his eyes gentle and calm. "She's happy. That's all I ever wanted." He never spoke poorly of Eric, never blamed Ujuka. In his heart he believed love should be free, never forced, never begged for. From that day on, Amadi kept to himself, but always asked the travelers from the city, "And how is Ujuka? Is she doing well?" When they answered yes, he would smile, nod, and say, "Good, she deserves peace." And though his love remained unspoken, it lived quietly in his heart, strong, pure, and full of grace. Back in the city, Tina sat alone in her apartment, staring out of the window. The silence around her felt heavy, filled with unanswered questions and fading memories. She had once dreamed of a future with Eric, smiles, laughter, shared goals. But now, all of that felt distant, like a dream slowly slipping away. She had tried to fight for their relationship. She had cooked his favorite meals, planned sweet surprises, and even waited patiently when he grew distant. But deep down, Tina had seen the change in his eyes, the way he spoke less about their plans and more about someone else, even without saying her name. Then came the truth. Eric had been in love with someone else, Ujuka, and not just any love, but a love so deep it had nearly destroyed him. When Tina heard about Eric's suicide attempt, her heart broke. Not from jealousy, not even from betrayal, but from sadness, because she realized that the man she had once loved now belonged to someone else completely. And maybe he always had. Tina took her time to process everything. She cried, she asked questions, and slowly, she let go. She didn't call to beg or argue. She didn't try to win him back. Instead, she stood in front of her mirror one morning, wiped her tears, and said to herself, "You deserve to be loved fully, not half." With quiet strength, Tina moved on. She focused on her work, surrounded herself with friends, and began to rediscover who she was without Eric. And when she thought of him again, it wasn't with bitterness. It was with calm acceptance. He loved her, she thought one day, watching the sun set. Truly, and she must have loved him too. And with that, Tina closed that chapter in her heart, not in anger, but with grace. News of Longinus's arrest spread through the village of Udala like wildfire. The man who had brought fear to every corner of the community was finally in chains. After years of hurting others, threatening lives, and walking freely as if no law could touch him, his time had come. The villagers gathered at the village square as the police officers led Longinus away. Some stared in silence, others clapped quietly, a few shed tears, not for Longinus but for the many people he had harmed, especially Ugona. At last, people began to speak. Witnesses who had once been afraid now came forward with stories of Longinus's wickedness. One brave young man stepped forward and told the truth about the planted gun that led to Ugona's death. Another woman shared how Longinus had threatened to harm her family if she dared speak out. The village chief called for a meeting, and before the entire village he stood and said, "We failed a good young man. Ugona was innocent. He died protecting his sister and standing up for what was right. We owe him honor, even if we did not give him justice while he lived." Ujuka and Amara stood side by side that day, tears falling from their eyes as the chief announced that the village would build a small memorial in Ugona's name, a simple stone with his name engraved, placed beside the river where he used to sit with Amara. Ujuka placed a white flower at the base of the stone. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "You didn't die in vain, my brother. They know the truth now." Amara knelt beside her, holding her hand. "And they'll never forget your kindness. You were the bravest soul this village ever knew." With Longinus locked away and Ugona's name finally cleared, a heavy weight lifted from Ujuka's heart. Justice had come. Late, but real. The truth had finally spoken, and it spoke loudly for Ugona. Now, both Ujuka and Amara could begin to heal, not by forgetting the past, but by knowing that Ugona's light had not been buried with him. It was shining brighter than ever. With the pain of the past finally behind them, Eric and Ujuka began a new chapter in their lives, one filled with hope, love, and quiet strength. Their journey had not been easy. They had faced heartbreak, loss, betrayal, and even near death. But somehow, through it all, they found their way back to each other. What once seemed broken beyond repair had been healed through forgiveness, honesty, and love that had stood the test of time. Eric moved back to Udala, not just for Ujuka, but because he had come to love the village where his life had changed forever. Together, they built a small home by the river, not far from where Ugona's memorial stood. Each morning, they would sit together on the porch, watching the sunrise, quietly grateful for second chances. But Ujuka wanted more than just peace for herself. She wanted to honor her brother's memory in a way that would last. With Eric's help, she started a small village program that focused on children's education and free health checkups. She made sure every child in Udala had access to books, school uniforms, and regular eye tests. "No child should suffer in silence like I did," she often said. She visited the schools herself, sharing her story with the students, how she lost her sight, how she found strength, and how kindness and courage could change lives. The children listened closely, their eyes wide with wonder. To them, Ujuka wasn't just a woman who had once been blind. She was a hero. Eric, now fully healed inside and out, continued his engineering work, helping to bring clean water and better roads to the village. Together, he and Ujuka became a symbol of hope, not because they were perfect, but because they had survived the worst and still chose love. And every year, on Ugona's birthday, they gathered by his memorial with friends, villagers, and children, placing flowers, telling stories, and celebrating the brave young man who had protected his sister with everything he had. Life moved forward, not without scars, but with purpose. Ujuka and Eric walked hand in hand through it all, not forgetting the past, but using it to build a brighter future. And so the story of pain became a story of healing. The story of loss became a story of love. The sun was beginning to set over the hills of Udala, casting a warm golden glow across the village. The soft breeze carried the sound of birds heading home and children laughing in the distance. Beneath the tall Iroko tree by the river stood a simple stone, Ugona's memorial. It was clean, surrounded by white lilies, and carved with the words, "In loving memory of Ugona, a brother, a protector, a hero." Eric and Ujuka stood quietly in front of it, hand in hand. The past, though painful, no longer held them captive. It had shaped them, yes, but it had not broken them. Ujuka gently placed a fresh flower at the foot of the stone, her fingers brushing the name carved into it. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the calm. "I miss him every day," she whispered, "but I know he would be happy now, to see us standing here together." Eric nodded, his grip around her hand tightening just slightly. "He gave his life for you, and now we will live in a way that honors his memory." They stood there for a while, letting silence speak the words their hearts already knew. Then, with the river glistening in the evening light, Ujuka turned to Eric and said, "Let's build something beautiful, for him, for us, for every child who deserves a better tomorrow." Eric smiled, his eyes full of love. "We already have. And this is just the beginning." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the earth, Eric and Ujuka walked away from the memorial, side by side, hearts light and spirits strong. Their story was no longer about what they had lost. It was about what they had found, and what they were still becoming, together. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of love, forgiveness, and second chances, don't keep it to yourself.
Share it with someone who needs hope today. Like this video, leave a comment below to tell us how it made you feel, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more powerful African stories that inspire and heal. Every share helps us keep these stories alive. Let's keep spreading light, one story at a time. Subscribe now and be part of our storytelling family.